Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, Laurence Shalloo gives insight into the nitrates modelling completed by Teagasc and the expected consequences of a change to nitrates calculations for your farm.
August of 2020 last year, we were asked to look at a number of scenarios from a department point of view and its impact on, nitrogen loss, grass growth, economics and so on. So one of the things, or I suppose some of the things that we were asked to look at were, the impact of changing the spreading date for chemical nitrogen, making it later in the spring and earlier in the autumn, reducing the levels of chemical nitrogen by 10 and 20% at different stocking rates. Looking at non-compliance around the closed period for slurry spreading. So essentially spreading slurry over the winter period. Also, we were looked at stocking rate and reducing the stocking rate from 250 to 230 in terms of organic N and the impact. And I suppose while we were doing that, a request came in around looking at the milking platform versus the whole farm and the impact of having higher stocking rates on the milking platform. I suppose finally then we were asked to look at organic N and how organic N has changed over time. And based on a request that came back from the Commission during the process earlier this year, what would a banding system look like for Ireland? And when we talk about a banding system, it means, having different bands for different farms based on their milk yield per cow, which is similar to other countries.
And let's take a step back and walk through these different scenarios that you're talking about, Laurence. I mean, to start, what were the nitrogen-based outcomes that you would have seen, given the studies that you've undertaken?
Yeah, and I suppose, first thing to do here is to acknowledge that, I suppose when we started this process, we wondered about the type of model that we'd use and so on. But, when we started getting stuck into it, we quickly realised that we had a very useful tool here called the MOST model, which is a model that a colleague LD Ruel uses, and it's very useful for predicting grass growth. And most farmers, or lots of farmers, would see information coming from this model through pasture base and directly on an ongoing basis. So that was the main engine we used to drive it, and we also use a second model, which is the Moorepark Dairy Systems model. What we did then was we used the model to answer each one of those specific questions. And I suppose the most interesting and the most dramatic answer across the board was the variation from year to year. So if management doesn't change, or if management didn't change in any one year, the nitrogen that I suppose leaves the system to 1 metre, there was a difference of 100%. So, it ranged from 39 kilos to 88 kilos. So that's important. Year-to-year variation is probably the most important outcome of this report. It's absolutely huge. And I suppose to bring that on, as farmers, how nitrogen is managed and how our overall systems are managed needs to be dynamic and needs to, I suppose the way to look at it, we need a precision-based approach. And I suppose many farmers are doing this now through using tools like Pasture Base Ireland, using predictions around grass growth and so on. And we need to be dynamic in how we manage our systems. I suppose especially as we see more climate change in our environments.
Looking to stocking rate then, modelling reducing from your 250 down to 230. Talk through that, Laurence.
Yeah, so I suppose, just an important point here is, it's important that we put this out there is that, even when we look at this year, organic N per cow went up from 85 up to 89. And that means that our overall stocking rates reduce. And there's a saving in that. So I suppose what we showed was, when we looked at that saving, moving from 85 up to 89, and then looked further from saving from going from 250 down to 230 kilos of organic N, what we can see here is the amount of leaching that we're saving is somewhere around 4%, 5%, or 3 kilos. So, half of that has been achieved already. Half of that has been achieved by organic N going up to 89 like we have this year. But if we were to reduce stocking rate further, the reduction would be relatively small, roughly about 1.2, 1.3 kilos, which obviously compare that to the financial impact of reducing stocking rate, which would be very big.
Looking then, you mentioned some modelling around spreading slurry during the closed period. I guess, we're under no illusions. This is happening facilities probably aren't there on farms to support the number of animals on farms in some scenarios. How damaging is this?
So yeah, I suppose we looked at two scenarios. We looked at where 12% of the slurry was spread over in December, of mid-December versus 25% of the slurry. And essentially what we can see here is that from the paddocks that are getting the slurry, there's an increase in leaching of 5%. So of the order of 4 kilos of additional leaching, 4.3 kilos of additional leaching, which is quite significant on these farms. So, I suppose it's a practice that I suppose as facilities haven't kept up with the increased cow numbers is something that we need to be really careful of, because it's very visual. We all can see it. And it's something that is damaging, and it's something that we need to work on very, very quickly to ensure that that's not causing problems in the long term.
Looking then to organic N, how has that changed over time?
Yeah, so again, I suppose, organic N is something that hadn't really been looked at. We were working off the 85 kilos of organic N from, I think people, when we asked people where the number came from, it's not really clear, but it probably came in reps in 1994. It was probably incorrect at the time, to be honest. It was probably too high at the time, given the milk yields that we had then. So I suppose we were requested to look at organic N, see how it has changed over time. And I suppose it's important to, I suppose we had to put a methodology together, and we had to look at then how numbers changed. And what we did was we modelled how organic N has changed between 2012 and 2019. And obviously over that period we've had dramatic increases in milk yield and so on. So I suppose if we look at it, in 2012, organic N was 88 kilos of organic N per cow, increasing up to 91 in 2017 and 94 in 2019. So that's how organic N has changed. I suppose when people might be wondering then, where did we get a figure of 89 that was implemented this year? Essentially where that came from is the average of 17 to 13. So a 5-year period, that was 89. If we look at the average between 2018 and 2014, that figure comes out at 90. And if we look at the average between 2019 and 2015, that figure comes out at 91. So if we made no change to how organic N is treated at farm level and went with one figure, essentially what we would say is that 89 will become 91, and that 91 will continue to increase over time as performance of the animal, as milk yield per cow increases, and as performance of the animal increases.
And let's look at that in terms of the performance of animals. And you mentioned that ye have created, I guess, some guidance or recommendation in terms of banding. Can you explain what way the banding is working and some more insight into it? Yeah,
so I suppose, the question came back from Brussels. In most countries, not all, but in most countries in the EU, there is a tiered system where every cow is not treated equally. It's related to the milk yield of the cow. So DAFM asked us to do something similar for Ireland, and I suppose we put a lot of thought into that and processes around it, and looking at different scenarios. Should we have a number of 6, 7, 8 categories? Should we have a small number of categories? And I suppose our overriding principle was that we wanted to, I suppose, minimize the disruption for the vast majority of farmers if this system was to be put in place. So we came up with a system that essentially has 3 bands, under 4,500 kilos in volume, between 4,500 and 6,500 kilos, and greater than 6,500 kilos. So they're the 3 bands. And how do the numbers work on that? Essentially, we have about 65% of farmers in the, or 70% of milk, in the middle category that are not disrupted. About 12.6% of farmers milk in the lower category, and then about 11% of suppliers in the higher category. So that's where it was over the last 5 years. Now, obviously, when we calculate the organic N for those group, we have a figure of, for the less than 4,500 kilos, we have a figure of 80 kilos of organic N, between 4,500 and 6,500, 92, and greater than 6,500 kilos, 106. I suppose just a couple of points. Obviously, if you're in this higher category, you're not going to be overly impressed by this. I suppose just to make a few points, if we design a system with more bands, which can be done, that means that there'll be higher categories. So greater than 6,500, greater than 7,500, greater than 8,500, whatever. They'll all have higher organic end. That might be 120 or 125 or whatever. So the more bands, the more categories, the more disruption, and the more, I suppose, stocking rate will be implemented. That's the first point. And I suppose the second point then is the way the system was designed was to be as simple and as easily implemented as possible. Most farmers think of milk yield on a volume basis, and that's despite Teagasc spending many years talking about solids. Milk price is quoted on a cent per litre basis most of the time. So I suppose that's one of the main reasons why we went with a volume-based set of numbers. I suppose the other reason we did was we, again, want to allow farmers to increase efficiency within this banding system. So, yes, you can increase volume up to the trigger point, but you can increase your milk protein and fat concentration. You're not restricted at all in that. And that's positive for the industry. So, if this trigger or if these bands were built on a milk solids basis, you'd have a double lock system where you'd be locking on solids as well as volume. And we wanted to try and develop a system that was simpler than that.
And you've answered my key question, Laurence, and that is, I guess, what more and more people are talking about, with the figures that have come out and these new bands. People are saying milk yield, some people have, I suppose, taken up that message and moved on to milk solids. So, and a key point there, efficiency and how we're paid is that A plus B minus C system. And, you're not going to be penalised for improvements to your fat and protein percentage. Looking to the future, Laurence, and the nitrates figures, and I guess the derogation is renewed on a kind of on a 4-year basis. Is there a situation that you would worry for the future of the derogation overall for the country, but I guess for some of the, say, 7,000 farmers that are engaging with derogation on an annual basis?
So for me, I think that, that decision, that outcome is based on what the industry does now. If you look at it and look at the numbers and stand back for it, there is, some change needed at farm level. And that change, if implemented, whether it's around, slurry spreading over the winter period, whether it's around a suggested reduction in chemical nitrogen, that should stand us in good stead for the next derogation. And I suppose a little bit of investment now or a little bit of change now could be very valuable into the future. And it's actually, similar with the banding. If we stay with the current one number, which you'd question is equitable, is it equitable that a cow that's doing 8,000 litres and a cow that's doing 4,500, 5,000 litres have the same number? It's probably not. So if we go with a banded system, the level of change going forward becomes much less. So what we've seen here is that if we stay with one number, organic N is probably going to increase by 0.7 of a kilo per year. So every 4 years, it'll increase by 3 kilos. With the banded system, it probably won't happen like that. And you would change bands rather than your organic N increase. So, obviously there's always a danger that a derogation could be lost. But, I think some change now could stand us in very good stead for the future.
It was really great to get some insight into the model, Laurence. I suppose particularly what is included in it and the outcomes that you would expect to see based on different scenarios. I guess to wrap up, Laurence, you're involved in organising the Moorepark Open Day. We would have spoken to Pat Dillon in mid-August. I guess since then there has been developments in the reopening process in the country. In light of this, could you give us an update in terms of what we could expect the Moorepark Open Day to look like this year?
So, Emma-Louise, we're delighted to get the opportunity to do that here. So essentially what we're looking at now is, that we had a change in government guidelines last week, which means that we're going very much for a physical open day up to a limit of 4,000 people per day. That means we're going to run it over the 3 days. So it's going to be on the 14th, 15th and 16th. Couple of changes to, the farmers might be used to the open day in the past. Couple of changes. We are requiring people to pre-register. And that's so that we can manage the numbers over the 4 days, that we don't get maybe 8, 9, 10,000 in one day or whatever. So people must pre-register, and within that they have to, declare that they either have been vaccinated, that they're immune, or they are an accompanied minor. So we are going with the government, guideline that says that that category of people can be treated up to 75% of capacity. Now we're working well below 50% of our capacity, but we're still going with that category. So you must pre-register, and then on entry you will be asked to declare or show your vaccination cert or whatever. So that will be different to other years. So that's a small little bit of an inconvenience to people, but other than that, it'll be very similar to Moorepark Open Day that you would have been at in the past. Just 2 other notes. We have 2 virtual events. Wednesday morning is not so much a Teagasc virtual event, but it's the National Dairy Council and our NUA Milk Quality Awards. They're going to come live from the Open Day, and that'll go out live at 9 o'clock on Wednesday morning. And then on Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock, we have a forum, an industry forum. And within that, we have Mary Donnelly, who is the chair of the Climate Change Council. We have Minister Charlie McConalogue. We have John Jordan from our NUA, and we have Jerry Boyle from Teagasc. And that's chaired by Sharon Viola. And they'll talk about, key industry issues going forward and the key challenges and opportunities that are out there for the dairy industry. Finally, just to finish, I'd like to thank or acknowledge our sponsors, FBD, AIB and our NUA.
And I guess just to re-emphasise what you said, Laurence, it's important that people do register, and registration is open from today. So you'll find that on the Teagasc website. And also then to reiterate, a slight change to the virtual events. On Wednesday morning, you'll have the NDC Milk Quality Awards, and Wednesday evening will be the forum. Thank you, Laurence.
Thanks, Emma-Louise.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. And my thanks to Laurence Shalloo for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the Dairy Edge podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.